As I testify before the committee today, I want to be clear. I stand by my decisions as special counsel, including the decision to bring charges against President Trump. Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in criminal activity. If asked whether to prosecute a former president based on the same facts today, I would do so regardless of whether that president was a Democrat or a Republican. No one should be above the law in this country, and the law required that he be held to account, so that is what I did. To have done otherwise on the facts of these cases would have been to shirk my duties as a prosecutor and as a public servant, of which I had no intention of doing.
Trump has said that you, Mr. Smith, should be investigated and put in prison. He called you a disgrace to humanity, a radical left Marxist, a criminal. In fact, Trump has used the words deranged Jack Smith 185 times on Truth Social. How do you think that these statements have impacted you, your staff, and your investigation?
With respect to me, I think the statements are meant to intimidate me. I will not be intimidated. I think these statements are also made as a warning to others what will happen if they stand up. And I am, as I say, I'm not going to be intimidated. We did our work pursuant to department policy. We followed the facts and we followed the law, and that process resulted in proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed serious crimes. I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen because he's threatening me.
And Mr. Smith, do you believe that President Trump's Department of Justice will find some way to indict you?
I believe that they will do everything in their power to do that because they've been ordered to by the president.
That's very concerning, obviously. It's very concerning to all of us, at least on this side of the aisle. This is Trump's playbook at work. Complain loudly, gin up hatred and resentment, then express our hope that somebody will do something, but never explicitly order anyone to act, and then watch as his followers and loyalists go after their targets. This is what happened on January 6th. Trump stood at the Ellipse and gave a campaign speech to his supporters, and he said, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. And I think it's clear that his intimidation will stop at nothing.
Imagine a room where the man who prosecuted war criminals finally sits across from the politicians who have spent years calling for his imprisonment. For the first time, Jack Smith isn't speaking through a legal filing. He is looking the American people in the eye. What happened next wasn't just a political hearing. It was an explosive confrontation that showed us exactly how high the stakes have become for our democracy. Tonight, we go inside the room where the past, the present, and a very uncertain future all collided at once. Let's play this clip.
Rather than accept his defeat in the 2020 election, President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results and prevent the lawful transfer of power. After leaving office in January of 21, President Trump illegally kept classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago social club and repeatedly tried to obstruct justice to conceal his continued retention of those documents. Highly sensitive national security information was held in a ballroom and a bathroom.
Good evening. We begin tonight with a moment that was years in the making. A moment that feels like the climax of a long and painful chapter in our national story. On January 22nd, 2026, the quiet, methodical world of a federal prosecutor met the high-voltage theater of a House Judiciary Committee hearing. For over 8 hours, former special counsel Jack Smith defended the work that has made him a household name and a target of unprecedented political vitriol. He sat before a panel of lawmakers who had already branded him a criminal and a deranged lunatic on social media. But what was intended to be a dry oversight hearing quickly turned into a visceral shouting match that exposed the deep, unhealed wounds of the January 6th insurrection. The most serious development didn't just happen at the witness table. It happened in the gallery and during the breaks, where the physical reality of what happened 5 years ago came face to face with the new political order. Michael Fanone, the former D.C. Metropolitan Police officer who was nearly killed defending the Capitol, was there to support Jack Smith. He sat in the same room as Ivan Raiklin, a conservative activist who has been described by some media outlets as a secretary of retribution for the current administration. During a break, the room erupted. Fanone accused Raiklin of making horrific personal threats against his family and children. As former colleagues and Capitol police officers moved in to separate them, the tension in the room reached a breaking point. Fanone shouted that Raiklin was a traitor and a sick bastard, while Raiklin mocked the former officer's visible anger, claiming he was in total control of his own mind and body. This wasn't just a spat between two men, it was a microcosm of the conflict Jack Smith was there to address. As the hearing resumed, the rhetoric from the dais only intensified. Representative Troy Niels of Texas looked at the former officers in attendance and told them that the fault for January 6th did not lie with Donald Trump, but with the police leadership itself. Fanone's response was audible on the hot mics, a blunt three-word dismissal that echoed the frustration of many who felt the history of that day was being rewritten in real time. This is the urgent reality we face today, a world where the facts of a violent attack are being swapped for a narrative of political persecution. Jack Smith didn't flinch. In his opening remarks, he delivered a sober, factual defense of the rule of law. He told the committee, "No one should be above the law in this country, and the law required that he be held to account. So that is what I did." He testified that his team had developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt in both the election interference case and the classified documents case. He made it clear that if he were presented with the same facts today, he would bring the same charges regardless of whether the defendant was a Republican or a Democrat. He was there to rebut the idea that his office had been weaponized. Instead, he painted a picture of a conspiracy that was devoid of shame, driven by a president who was not looking for honest answers about election fraud, but was instead looking for ways to stay in power at any cost. To understand why this hearing felt so urgent, we have to look back at the narrative Jack Smith spent years building. It wasn't just about tweets and rallies, it was about what Smith called the through line of the entire criminal effort: deceit. His investigation uncovered that Donald Trump was repeatedly told by his own allies, his own campaign staff, and his own vice president that his claims of widespread election fraud were simply not true. In Pennsylvania, the chair of the Republican Party told the president directly that the shift in the vote count wasn't fraud. It was the normal counting of absentee ballots. In Arizona and Michigan, Republican speakers of the House rejected his entreaties to overturn the will of the people. Smith pointed to evidence that the former president knew he had lost. He cited statements where Trump allegedly admitted, "It doesn't matter if you won or lost the election, you still fight like hell," and even reportedly asked, "Can you believe I lost to this effing guy?" But despite this internal knowledge, the public narrative remained one of a stolen election. This disconnect, Smith argued, was what fueled the violence we all saw on our screens. He described a president who exploited that violence, using it as a final, desperate tool to delay the certification of the vote. While the hearing focused on these broad strokes, the Republicans on the committee zeroed in on a specific investigative tool, toll records. They accused Smith of spying on members of Congress by obtaining the phone logs of nearly a dozen lawmakers who were in contact with the White House on January 6th. Smith defended the move as a standard legal part of a criminal investigation. These records didn't contain the content of the calls, they just showed who was calling whom and for how long. Smith argued this was necessary to build a timeline of the conspiracy and to show how the president was using conduits like Rudy Giuliani to pressure lawmakers even as the Capitol was being breached. The conversation then turned to the other half of Smith's work, the classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. Smith described a situation that was, in his view, an unprecedented threat to national security. He spoke of top-secret documents, information that could cause exceptionally grave damage to the country, being stored in unsecure locations like a ballroom stage and even a bathroom shower. He walked through the evidence of obstruction, The 64 boxes that were moved out of a storage room just before a lawyer arrived to search them, with only 30 boxes ever being returned. He detailed the alleged attempt to delete security camera footage, where an IT director was told that the boss wanted the server wiped. But as Jack Smith laid out these facts, the shadow of the current political reality loomed over the entire hearing room. Smith admitted to the committee that he expects to be indicted himself. He told lawmakers, "I believe that they will do everything in their power to do that because they've been ordered to by the president." This is the world we are living in now. Career prosecutors, FBI agents, and support staff who worked on these cases have been fired or targeted for retaliation. An executive order was even issued to suspend the security clearances of Smith's own legal team at Covington and Burling. The human cost of this struggle was sitting right there in the room. Harry Dunn, a 13-year veteran of the Capitol Police, has been one of the most vocal witnesses to the reality of January 6th. In his testimony before the Select Committee years ago, which was revisited during the Smith hearing, Dunn described the racial abuse he suffered that day. He told the story of a woman in a pink MAGA shirt who rallied a crowd to scream racial slurs at him after he told them he had voted for Joe Biden. He described the isolation of working 6 days a week while juggling therapy for the trauma he endured. He spoke about the hitman who sent the mob, an analogy for the leadership he believes is responsible for the attack. The hearing also highlighted the jarring contrast in how the legal system is currently functioning. While investigators like Smith are facing potential prosecution, those who were convicted of assaulting officers on January 6th have been granted sweeping, unconditional pardons. Smith was asked why these pardons make our communities less safe. He responded that people who assaulted police officers are, by definition, dangers to their community. He pointed out that some of these individuals have already gone on to commit other crimes since being released. For the officers who held the line that day, these pardons are a travesty. This brings us to the deeper, more academic, but very real legal questions that were raised by the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity. Jack Smith's ability to bring these cases to trial was ultimately halted by that ruling. Legal scholars writing in the Duke Law Journal and elsewhere have warned that the court's creation of absolute and presumptive immunity has created a structural logic that could permanently change the presidency. They argue that by removing the backstop of criminal prosecution for official acts, the court has invited a regression to a more corrupt era of American government. The concern is what they call a cascade of corruption. When a president can commit acts that would normally be criminal, like bribery or perjury, under the shield of core constitutional powers, it changes the incentives for everyone else in the executive branch. Subordinate officials no longer know where the line is. They may feel empowered to facilitate illegal acts because they believe they have presidential cover, or because they no longer fear that a future administration will be able to hold them accountable. This isn't just a theory. We are seeing the hydraulic displacement of legal accountability already. Throughout the hearing, Jack Smith was pushed to explain his timing. Why file a 165-page brief just a month before the election? Republicans like Senator Tom Cotton argued this was a deliberate and underhanded effort to influence the 2024 election. Smith's response was rooted in the Speedy Trial Act. He argued that the public has a right to a prompt resolution of criminal cases, especially those of such utmost gravity. He pointed out that his office actually agreed to keep much of the evidence under seal until after the election, if the court had so ordered. He insisted that his only North Star was to follow the facts and the law, nothing more and nothing less. The tragedy of this moment is the erosion of common ground. We saw it in the room on January 22nd. One side sees a hero defending the Constitution, the other sees a deranged animal who should be stripped of his law license. One side sees a violent insurrection, the other sees a loving crowd or a group of tourists. Even the way we consume this news is polarized. Studies of sourcing and partisan news show that different outlets construct entirely different epistemic worlds for their audiences. One network CITs experts and formal documents to build authority, while another relies on news reports and direct quotes to create a sense of unfiltered immediacy. We aren't just disagreeing on policy anymore. We are disagreeing on what constitutes a fact. As the hearing drew to a close, the focus returned to the human element. Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, the immigrant who served in Iraq and then saw his own citizens turn against him at the Capitol, asked the committee for the tools the police need to continue protecting them. He asked for the courage from elected officials to put the country before their own party. He spoke about the physical pain of his surgeries and the emotional trauma that hasn't ended. He said, democracy is bigger than any one person and any one party. You all tried to disrupt democracy that day, and you all failed. Jack Smith echoed that sentiment in his final moments of testimony. He reminded the room that the structure of our democracy is fragile and depends on the accountability of its leaders. He lamented the vilification of dedicated public servants and warned that firing them for doing their jobs drives people away from public service entirely. He spoke about the Saturday Night Massacre during the Nixon era as a historical warning of what happens when the culture of legality is threatened. So, where does this leave us? The investigations into Donald Trump were dropped after his re-election, following the long-standing DOJ policy that a sitting president cannot be indicted. The reports were completed, the testimony was given, and the special counsel has resigned. But the questions raised in that hearing room in early 2026 remain unanswered. Can a democracy survive if its leaders are immune from the laws they are sworn to execute? Can a justice system function if its prosecutors are treated as political enemies? The structural logic of immunity suggests that the damage to our institutions may be deep and long-lasting. It suggests that the informal norms that have held this country together for over 2 centuries are being replaced by a system of mutual forbearance that is breaking down under the weight of asymmetrical legal leeway. When one party feels it can tilt the playing field without consequence, the stable zone of agreement that makes democracy possible begins to vanish. As we look at the images from that hearing, the shouting, the police intervention, the somber face of a federal prosecutor, we have to decide which side of history we want to be on. Do we want a country where the facts matter, or a country where the loudest voice determines the truth? Jack Smith told the committee that he did his duty. Michael Fanone and Harry Dunn said they did theirs. Now the question is what we will do with the information they've left behind. The story of Jack Smith's investigation isn't just a legal footnote, it's a warning. It's a narrative of a country at a crossroads struggling to hold on to the very principles that once made it an example for the world. Whether you believe Smith is a hero or a villain, the facts he uncovered and the consequences of the immunity he fought against will shape our national life for generations to come. We will continue to follow the fallout from this hearing and the ongoing changes at the Department of Justice. But for tonight, the last word belongs to the men who were there on the line. They held it once. The question is, who will hold it next? I'm your host, and this has been a deep dive into the testimony of Jack Smith and the fight for the soul of our democracy. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.